The reading is from John's Gospel, starting at the beginning of chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." The reading continues from verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out of the synagogue. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains."
Well, good morning. It's nice to see you. My name is Andy. If you're a visitor here, and I'll just add my welcome to Dave. So we're really pleased that you've come. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time reflecting on the passage that we just had read to us. Thank you for that, Roger. Imagine that you are invited out for dinner this week by a friend, and there's a bunch of people there you don't know at the dinner table. And you find yourself just kind of sitting next to somebody and chatting away to them. They're asking you all sorts of questions about yourself, and you're answering. And then you say to them, "But enough about me. I want to hear about you. Tell me a bit about yourself." And they just take one of the little appetizers, dip it in some sauce, eat it, look at you, smile, and then they say, "Well, I was born blind. But then, a few years ago, someone opened my eyes." Now, I don't know how you would react if you were in a conversation like that, but I would lean in and say, "Tell me everything," right? Start from the beginning. I want to hear the whole story. Tell me what happened. And although we're separated by 2,000 years from the man to whom this happened, the impact of the story really shouldn't be any less. We have somebody who was born blind and then somebody opened his eyes. So if I could go back in time and take him out for dinner, how would he tell the story, I wonder? What would he say about what happened? And in my imagination, at least, he kind of leans back in his chair, takes a drink, looks around, because the novelty has still not worn off yet, looks around and then sort of begins to tell me about his life. And I think he would start by saying, well, I was born blind. I was born, so the world for me was what I could hear and it was what I could touch, but it was that was it. There was nothing, I had no concept of color, I had no concept of what the faces of the people in my life looked like. I would make my way, and he says, and gradually I kind of like, my parents looked after me, but eventually I ended up becoming a beggar. It was the only way I had to survive. And so I found a spot where, I managed to scrape a living, and I would sit in that particular spot, and every day I would beg, I would call out just for money, for alms. And people would sometimes give me a coin, but it was ironic. I imagine him saying anyway that I was blind, but it felt like they couldn't see me either. So I'd sit there day after day after day, and he said the high points in the begging life were when the festivals happened, because that's when there were big crowds, you're more likely to get more money. And the biggest one was always the Feast of Tabernacles. And so year after year at the Feast of Tabernacles, I would turn up, try and get my spot. I wanted the prime spot every year. I'd get it, I'd sit there, I'd beg. And he said, and then there was this one year when I was at the Feast of Tabernacles, as usual, I was in my same spot as I normally am. The crowds were going past as they usually do. And then I heard a voice that I had not heard before. And this person was clearly talking to some other people that he was with. So I just caught the tail end of the conversation. And the last thing that as he approached me, that I heard him saying to his friends as he walked up towards me was this little phrase that's always stayed with me: I am the light of the world. And then he and I had a conversation. He made some mud, he put it on my eyes. He told me to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. So I made my way there. I washed, and all I can remember is as I took my hands away from washing it with water, I could see them for the first time. And I imagine him sort of saying, I saw the sky, because I'd never been able to feel that. And I saw the sun. I had felt that, but I'd never actually been able to look at it with my own eyes. And then I just looked around, and these streets that I had walked through by touch every day of my life, suddenly I could see them. And I started to hear voices. When I got back home, I heard the voices that I recognized of the neighbors that I knew, but for the first time I could see their faces. I wonder if he looked at his reflection in the pool of Siloam and saw his own face for the first time. But anyway, then he gets dragged in, and he'll tell us, then the religious leaders found out about it. They wanted to have a conversation, so they brought me in, and they said, tell us what happened. I tried to convince them, but they wouldn't believe me, and eventually they kicked me out of the synagogue. And then Jesus came and found me. And this is a side point, but whenever you get kicked out, Jesus will always come looking for you. Whenever people reject you, Jesus will always deliberately come and find you. So that's just how Jesus is, but that is another talk for another day. So he says, I get kicked out. Jesus comes and finds me, and then we have a conversation, and I say, well, who, tell me who it is, who's the Son of Man, that I might believe. And he said, it was me. And then before I know it, I'm not looking in his face, I'm looking at his feet, because I've fallen on the ground and I'm worshiping him. And I imagine as he sits there at the table with us, he smiles almost to himself and says, I've been worshiping him ever since. And his story should impact us, and it should impact us on so many levels. The signs, the miracles that there are in John's gospel, we've been looking at them over the last couple of months now. They are miracles. Jesus is a God of miracles. He can physically bring healing, but that is another talk for another day. Because the signs, what they also do is they point beyond simply what's happening in the physical to a deeper reality, a spiritual truth, as it were, about who Jesus is. They're always telling us about who Jesus is. And the question we might want to be asking ourselves as we come to this story is, what is Jesus up to, and what is it telling us about who he is? And what's happening in the physical is one thing. His eyes are being opened, but that is also a metaphor. Sight is a metaphor, and we still use it as one today. So someone might say, I see, as in I literally see, but we've probably all said the phrase, oh, I see. I see. I get it. Something has just the penny has dropped. Something has become real to me. And Jesus, what he does is he opens our eyes so that we can see. And there are 3 questions that we'll engage with just to help us to consider what he's up to. So here's the 3. First of all, do we want spiritual sight? Secondly, what does spiritual sight look like or feel like? And thirdly, how might we continue to receive spiritual sight? So here's the first one. Do we want spiritual sight? Do we want to see? Jesus said, and this is in towards the end of our reading, he said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." So if we're posed with this question of like, do you really want to see what is actually going on in the world? Would you be interested in understanding that? We might think the answer to that would be obvious, right? The answer is surely yeah, absolutely I want to see. We assume perhaps of ourselves that we're definitely agents of truth and that we want to know the truth. But actually, if we take a step back and look at our culture, some of those things should give us pause for thought. And one of the most obvious is the phenomenon of the echo chamber, which is this idea that what we do is we exist in environments where we deliberately expose ourselves to viewpoints that reinforce what we already want to believe, what we already do believe often. And that's just accentuated by the social media algorithms that basically filter out for us opposing viewpoints and feed us with content that is similar to the content that we have already interacted with and that we already think is true. And that is a major reason why polarization is happening to an extent greater than I think we've seen for many, many years. Tribalism is happening to an unprecedented extent. And echo chambers are kind of nice. They're kind of cozy. What they do is they convince us that we are the majority and that all those idiots out there just need to have their minds changed and they'll see the world as we see it. That's the nature of an echo chamber. It's why we gravitate into them. And what I love about Jesus in this story is he just wanders into the Pharisees' echo chamber and blows their algorithms to pieces. He is what they don't want to hear. He is someone that they don't want to know because, and for them, I imagine internally in their heads as Jesus is operating. And all of this, by the way, is happening at the Feast of Tabernacles, as it happened last week and the week before. So at the Feast of Tabernacles for the Pharisees, it's like red alarm bells going off. And I imagine them running around panicking, saying, system warning, he's disrupting everything. And for them, what he is he's a problem. Because he's suggesting that God is operating in a way that is outside of their framework. God is operating in a way that creates a problem for them. And so what they do is they steadfastly refuse to see what is in front of them. Even though what is in front of them is a man who has seen for the first time in his life. The irony abounds. They refuse to see it. And what God is doing is he's bringing life. He's bringing joy, he's bringing freedom everywhere, but it is possible for that to be going on, and we do not want to see it. Another great example is in John chapter 5. So there's a man there, we talked about this a couple of months ago, who is crippled, and he's been unable to walk for 38 years. And Jesus heals him, and he picks up his mat and he starts walking along. And then he bumps into some Pharisees and they say, "Why are you carrying your mat? It's the Sabbath." To which he responds, "Oh, the guy that just healed me, I haven't been able to walk for 38 years. He told me to pick up my mat and carry it." And they get outraged that this person has told the guy to pick up his mat. Just think about that for a second. Talk about missing the point. This is like somebody who's had some chronic condition and has been crippled by that condition for 38 years. And then they are miraculously and unexpectedly healed. And they're telling you this story. And they mention a passing detail. "Oh yeah, and I was on my way back from hospital and I accidentally swerved into a bus lane for a minute or two and then I came back out again." And they tell you this story of miraculous healing and you're just obsessed about the fact that they infringed on a bus lane. It's that. It's like they're missing it. So the man is healed and they cannot see. They cannot see that God is at work. So it's not just the Pharisees who do this. We can assume it's just them, but it isn't. Sometimes my wife tells me the truth about myself, and I steadfastly refuse to see it. I entrench myself with other people. I go and see friends who reinforce that I am actually right. I go and find my own little echo chamber of comfort, and it lasts for a little while. We don't want to see truth sometimes. And when I was growing up as in the 90s as a teenager, the famous movie The Matrix came out. Some of you will have seen that. But for those who haven't, the whole premise of the film is that you begin thinking it's the real world, and then you realize that actually what you think is the real world is the Matrix, which is this kind of computer system. AI has taken over the world, and it's run by robots. And so all the human beings are unknowingly trapped inside this virtual world. And then there's some rebel human beings who somehow have cracked the system and know what's really going on. And one of those, the leader of those, comes to the main character, who's a guy called Neo, and he starts to show him the truth, that what Neo thinks is reality is in fact not reality, and that there is a giant alien race of robots who've taken over. And Neo's kind of pretty upset by this. And after a conversation, Morpheus, who's the character, does this famous thing to him where he sort of becomes a classic scene in movies. He sort of holds out two hands. One hand, he says, do you want the red pill or do you want the blue pill? Now, the red pill, if you take the red pill, we go deeper into the rabbit hole, i.e., we're continuing to discover what the truth is. Or if you take the blue pill, you'll forget that we've ever had this conversation, and you can wake up just having it never taken place, and you can continue to live your life. So essentially, you've got a choice between awakening, which is going to be uncomfortable, and comfortable ignorance. Which would you choose? Here's a question. I don't know where you're at with God, whether you believe there is one or not. But what I'd ask is, if there is, would you want to know? Do you want the red pill or the blue pill? Do you want to be curious? Do you want to see? For those of us who follow Jesus, there'll be things about him we haven't seen yet. Things about ourselves we haven't seen yet. Do you want to see? So that's question number one. Here's question number two. What does it feel like to receive spiritual sight? What does that feel like? So remember, this kind of seeing is I get it moment. It's like it's become real to me. Ideas and concepts that maybe felt abstract, maybe things that we believed in theory, suddenly they hit home. And this can happen for people who've had no experience of church before, and this can happen to people who have been in church their whole lives. So Jesus comes for this purpose, that those of us who are blind will see. And just unpacking it, here's two key things that when we gain spiritual sight, we gain insight into. The first is this. We gain insight into, and I wish it was more cheerful than this, but it's just, this is what it is. We gain insight into our own sin. Good morning and welcome to church. We gain insight into the depth and the kind of like selfishness of our own hearts. Now, there's an extent to which we probably, all of us, whether we know God or we don't know God, are aware and would say things like, well, I know I'm not perfect. Right? Unless you've got a level of delusion to the point of being a complete narcissist, most of us would say, yeah, there are things I get wrong. There are things I don't do very well. I know I'm not perfect. So I've made mistakes. I've got some things that I regret in my life. Those things are fairly normal. But what we're talking about when we say that God shows us our sin, or we get this conviction of the depth of our own sin, is it's like it hits us in the guts. And it is entirely possible to be somebody who attends church for our whole lives and never really, and believe in sort of a general understanding of sin, but never really have it punch us in the guts, where we suddenly realize the depth of our own sin. And one of the stories that I've always loved when I've read it, and I'm going to read a little bit of it to you now, is part of a testimony of a hero of mine called John Wimber, who was a Californian pastor back in the day. He's no longer with us. But he tells and Nicky Gumbel tells this story in his Alpha Talk. He tells the story of him becoming a Christian. And he said that he was from a total non-church background, didn't have a clue about any of it, started hanging around with some Christians and heard some of the basic stuff that you hear about the Bible and things like that. But it just was knowledge to him. And he says, after I had studied the Bible for about 3 months, I could have passed an elementary exam on the cross. I understood that there is one God who could be known in 3 persons. I understood Jesus is fully God and fully man and that he died on the cross for the sins of the world. But I didn't understand that I was a sinner. I thought I was a good guy. I knew I messed up here and there, but I didn't realize how serious my condition was. But one evening around this time, Carol, who's his wife, said, I think it's time to do something about all that we've been learning. And they're sitting in somebody's front room having a bit of a Bible study. Then, as I looked on in utter amazement, she knelt down on the floor and started praying to what seemed to be the ceiling plaster. Oh God, she said, I'm sorry for my sin. I couldn't believe it. Carol was a better person than I, yet she thought she was a sinner. I could feel her pain and the depth of her prayers. Soon she was weeping and repeating, I am sorry for my sin. There were 6 or 7 people in the room, all with their eyes closed. I looked at them. And then it hit me. They've all prayed this prayer too. I started sweating bullets. I thought I was going to die. The perspiration ran down my face and I thought, I'm not going to do this. This is dumb. I'm a good guy. And then it struck me. Carol wasn't praying to the plaster. She was praying to a person, to a God who could hear her. In comparison to him, she knew she was a sinner in need of forgiveness. In a flash, the cross made personal sense to me. Suddenly, I knew something that I had never known. In other words, suddenly his eyes were opened. I had hurt God's feelings. He loved me, and in his love for me, he sent Jesus. But I had turned away from that love. I had shunned it all my life. I was a sinner desperately in need of the cross. Then I too was kneeling on the floor, sobbing, nose running, eyes watering, every square inch of my face perspiring profusely. I had this overwhelming sense that I was talking with someone who had been with me my whole life, but whom I had failed to recognize. Like Carol, I had been talking to the living God. I began talking to the living God, telling him that I was a sinner, but the only words that I could say aloud were, "Oh God, oh God." He realized. And it's so painful to realize that we have walked away from the God who has loved us our whole lives. But that's what it is to sin, and that doesn't stop there. The more we grow as followers of Jesus, the deeper that conviction becomes. I mean, I've been realizing that, initially I thought, I've done some bad things, and now I've realized so many of the things that I thought were good, I've been doing for the wrong reasons. I mean, even just last week, I heard about somebody who does the kind of thing that I do, and they were being really successful. And do you know what I felt as a first response to hearing that somebody was having great success in sharing the good news of Jesus? Do you know what my first response was? Jealousy. Envy. And then my second response was self-loathing, because I thought that and I felt that. And it's in comparison to him we realize how lost we really are. But stay with me, because here's the second bit and it gets a lot better. We also realize the richness of his grace and his goodness. And because I'm pretty limited on time, I'll say this quickly. The message of the gospel is that he comes to open our eyes that we might see not just his face, but his love. That we might see not just him standing there in front of us, but him giving up his very self for us. That's the message. And I remember hearing one preacher talk how early in his ministry, he was knocking on people's doors, just visiting them. And he knocked on the door of this one lady whose life had gone really badly wrong. And she was struggling to raise her children. She was on a really tight budget. And she just didn't think much of herself. In her community, she was on the fringes. And he said to her, well, actually, let me explain what Jesus does. And she thought we had to be good in order to be accepted. That is what most people think. And he said, no. He accepts us. And then as we receive his love, we change. She was amazed. She couldn't believe it. This kind of lightness came into her heart. And then he went away, and he came back the following week, and the heaviness was back. And she said, well, look, I rang my sister, and I told her, you'll never believe it, right? You'll never believe it. It's all free. It's all gift. It's all grace. And her sister had done much better in life and was married to somebody and he was very prominent in the community, and because of that had a lot of prominence and went to a prominent church and stuff. And her sister said, no, that can't be true. Her sister literally said to her, I've worked hard for my salvation, right? So you've got that one wrong. There's no way it's just given to you. Now, which of the two is spiritually blind? It's gift. It's free gift. All right, and finally, because we're almost out of time, how might we continue to receive spiritual sight? Because really, understanding the nature of the gospel is the beginning, but it doesn't stop there. And another way of putting this is, how do we keep that perspective? Because every day what will happen is a whole load of stuff will try and crowd out that sight that we get when we realize that we are broken and yet we are loved, that we have gone wrong and yet we have been found, that we were dead and yet we've been made alive, that we don't need to earn it because it's all given to us. We'll lose that. I mean, I lose it every single day, multiple times a day as a perspective. So what's the solution? Well, what we see is, this is the point he really sees. The man. Can you see the verse there? Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. That's the moment that his eyes really, truly were opened. He could have stayed blind, but if he had seen who Jesus was and worshipped who Jesus was, he would have seen the only thing that ever really matters. And so what happens is, when we get a perspective on who he is, then everything else finds its place. And we become wise, and we become free, and we find peace. Think about it like this. Before I got married, which is a long time ago now, before I got married, I basically lived like a king. I could wear what I want, and I did. I wore whatever I wanted to. I could eat whatever I wanted, and I did. I ate an awful lot of chips, chicken nuggets, and turkey dinosaurs. It was just mainly beige frozen food because that's all I could cook, but that's what I ate. And I could go where I wanted to go. So when I had a day off, I would go off and have some kind of an adventure. And then I got married. And what happened is, I can no longer wear what I want to wear. I've lost all confidence, frankly, in choosing my own clothes. So I just wear what I'm told to wear. I can no longer eat what I want to eat. If there is a strict rule, there has to be something green on my plate as well as on everybody else's plate. I can no longer go where I want to go. Yesterday, I left the house at 9:30 and I returned home at about 3 o'clock. And do you know where I'd been? I'd taken some of my kids to a football game. I'd picked up some other people's kids from a football game. I'd taken one of my kids to another football game, and I'd taken some of his friends home from that football game. I had then gone to the dump, and then I had picked up somebody else's kids from a birthday party. And that was my Saturday in its entirety. I can no longer go where I want to go. But I ask you, do I look like I'm suffering? Note to self, don't ask questions that you don't want the answer to. I'm not, right? I'm not. And the reason for that is because I got her. And so she's worth all of that times 1,000,000. And when I have that perspective, then I'll live in the light of it. And it will be easy for me. And the way I keep that perspective, here's how I think about it, is 75% offense, 25% defense. What I mean by that is, I won't do things, the defense. I'm not going to do that stuff that's going to cloud that, that's going to blind me to that. I'm not going to go there. But mainly what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to pursue intimacy. I'm going to pursue health in this relationship. Because when I'm doing that, then everything else has its place. When we worship him, when we know how much he's worth, when we realize what he's been given, then everything else falls into perspective. How do we keep that? How do we keep receiving spiritual sight? Because it's an ongoing journey. 25% defense. Don't do stuff that clouds us, that separates us, that blocks him out. 75% offense. Be with him. Be with his people. Be in his word. Worship in quiet. Worship with noise. Sit before him. Look at him. Eyes on him. If we see him, then by him, we can see everything else. Amen. Dave.
Thanks, Andy.